They called it the Dark Ages. Say the words, the Dark Ages. It conjures images of ruin, of ignorance, of 1,000 years lost to the dust. But was it truly dark? Or was that just the terrified judgment of those who lost the light? The truth is, this was the long, difficult dawn. The centuries when the world you live in, its nations, its faiths, its fundamental ideas of justice and power, was forged in fire and tempered by the conviction of desperate kings, the quiet cunning of queens, and the profound, relentless mystery of faith. This is the chaotic, vital, and absolutely essential story of medieval Europe. The whispers of ruin, when an empire died. We stand now in the 5th century. Look around. Where are the legions? Where is the law? Rome has fallen, not with the glorious cinematic bang of a final battle, but with a terrifying, drawn-out whimper. The roads are broken. The aqueducts run dry. Where once there was a single, unified power, there is now a vast, echoing political vacuum. And nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. This emptiness was suddenly filled with the rush of movement, the migration of tribes the Romans, in their arrogant final days, dismissed as barbarians. The traditional history books mark the year 476 AD, when the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed. But let's split the fact. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fractured under the weight of its own success. Centuries of economic stress, military overextension, and internal corruption rotted it from the inside out. The so-called barbarian kings like Odoacer, who took over, they weren't intent on total destruction. They wanted the title. They wanted to inherit the Roman system. But they were handed a corpse, and they just did a bad job of running the funeral. This period teaches us a chilling lesson, a lesson we must never forget. The greatest empires are often destroyed not by external enemies, but by the crushing weight of their own complexity. The baptism of the sword, Clovis, and the birth of a nation. But out of this death, new life was struggling to be born. These barbarians were now your founding fathers and founding mothers. Take Clovis, the king of the Franks, a fierce, brutal pagan with blood on his hands and ambition in his heart. He looked at the chaos and saw the ultimate prize. His most brilliant, world-altering move? It wasn't a battle. It was a conversion. In 508 AD, he adopted Catholic Christianity. Think about that. Suddenly, the most powerful, organized, and continent-spanning institution left standing, the Roman Church, was on his side. He didn't just gain faith, he gained instant legitimacy. This moment, brothers and sisters, is the birth of the strategic alliance between the sword and the cross, an alliance that would baptize Europe in fire and faith for the next 1,000 years. This is the feeling of standing for something, aligning raw military might with an unshakable moral authority. The mystery of the scroll, keepers of the flame. As the political structure imploded, one solitary institution stood firm, built on silence and devotion, the monastery. While the courts of kings were transient and violent, the monasteries were quiet, fortified islands of learning. They were the original data centers of Europe. It was here, in cold, stone cells, that dedicated monks labored under flickering candlelight, painstakingly copying the ancient texts of Cicero and Plato. The sheer volume of ancient knowledge that survived the Dark Ages is a miracle ode to the humble monk and his quill. The vast majority of your classical heritage was saved by this simple, quiet, deliberate act of devotion and ink. This is the true mystery of the age. Knowledge, the true foundation of civilization, was preserved not in grand libraries, but in secret, quiet, almost magical acts of faith and ink. The Great Revival, Charlemagne, father of Europe. But Europe couldn't remain a collection of scattered tribes and monasteries. It needed a vision. It needed a king to stand taller than all the others. Enter Charles the Great, Charlemagne. He was more than a king. He was a force of nature, a man who sought to heal the fragmentation of the West. He conquered. He legislated. He built an empire stretching across modern France, Germany, and Italy. Then came the moment that changed history forever. Christmas Day, 800 AD. The Pope crowned him Emperor of the Romans. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, breathtakingly audacious statement. It said, "The Roman Empire is not dead. It has simply been reborn, purified under God's chosen Frankish king." Charlemagne's reign proves that darkness is temporary. He imposed order. He sparked a cultural revival, the Carlovingian Renaissance. He gave the fragmented continent the first thrilling shared taste of a common European identity. The hammer from the sea, the Viking storm. But you cannot build a great order without inviting great challenge. The 9th and 10th centuries brought terror screaming from the north, the Vikings. They weren't just crude raiders, they were sophisticated explorers, traders, and utterly ruthless conquerors who adapted their longships to exploit Europe's weak coastal defenses. They sailed up the Seine, the Thames, the Volga. Kings failed to stop them. Central authority dissolved into chaos. This era was defined by decentralized defense. Who stepped up? The local lord. The man with the stone tower and the few loyal armored men. The knight. He was the only defense left. This desperation, this brutal necessity, is the crucible that created the fundamental political structure of the entire Middle Ages, feudalism. The age of the Grand Emperor was over. The age of the local lord, the local castle, and the brutal necessity of decentralized power had begun.
The smoke clears from the Viking raids. The great question for Europe is no longer, will we survive, but how will we organize this sprawling, hungry land? The answer they engineered was a brilliant, intricate, and deeply rigid system: feudalism. The web of oaths, a medieval contract. Forget the boring pyramid diagram you saw in school. Think of feudalism as a complex, interlocking web of mutual obligation, a series of contracts based entirely on land and loyalty. This was the ultimate, original gated community with a built-in military service requirement. The king theoretically owned the whole board. He parceled out huge chunks of land, called fiefs, to his powerful vassals, the dukes and counts. What did they give in return? An oath of homage and fealty, promising to bring their knights to war whenever the horn sounded. And at the very base, the serfs. They weren't slaves, but they were permanently tied to the land. They couldn't be sold, but they couldn't leave. Their whole existence was about farming the land and paying their dues. Why accept this life? Because in an era without central banks, police, or centralized armies, feudalism provided stability. It was a clear, if harsh, legal framework. It was the functional, brutal solution to extreme insecurity. The ultimate strategist, Eleanor of Aquitaine. But life at the top was not just oaths and contracts. It was a game of high-stakes political chess. If the Middle Ages were played on that chessboard, the kings were often just the rooks, Powerful, yes, but predictable, moving in straight lines. The queens, however, were the ultimate unpredictable strategists. Our focus must fall upon the most breathtaking figure of the High Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine. This woman was an earthquake in a royal dress. She didn't just marry a king, she married two of them. First, the pious, rather dull King of France, then the dynamic, terrifying Henry II of England. Why did they want her? Because she was a duchess in her own right, controlling a vast, rich territory in France. When she married Henry, she effectively doubled his kingdom overnight. Eleanor was a political, cultural, and even military force. She literally joined the Second Crusade herself. She wasn't just decorative, she was a sovereign power who repeatedly challenged the absolute authority of the men who married her. She stands for the idea that talent and sheer, relentless ambition cannot be caged by gender or title. She was the ultimate early medieval influencer, patronizing poets and fostering the vibrant, romantic court culture of chivalry. The Code of Chivalry. The warrior class, the knights, needed a way to civilize themselves, or at least justify their constant violence. That's where chivalry comes in. The myth? Lancelot, shining armor, rescuing the damsel in distress. The fact? Chivalry was primarily a code of conduct designed to mitigate the brutal realities of war and provide a moral framework for killing. It gave violence a purpose. And courtly love, that famous medieval romance, it was often just a literary conceit, a way for bored noblewomen and ambitious poets to intellectualize relationships, promoting themes of idealized devotion and piety. But here is the lasting value. This code created the bedrock ideals of honor, duty, and the protection of the weak that are still woven directly into our legal and military traditions today. The sacred fire, the historical wars that defined faith. The Crusades. No historical wars shaped the European psyche more profoundly than these centuries of conflict, starting in 1095 AD. Pope Urban II stood up and called for the liberation of the Holy Land. The response was electric, a wave of religious zeal that swept across the continent. But let's split the facts. Were they truly about deep religious fervor? Yes, absolutely. A genuine, consuming desire to reclaim sacred sites. But there was also calculation. The political motives. The popes wanted to redirect the restless, violent energy of Europe's knights outward, away from fighting each other. It was a brilliant move of political management. The easy answer is economic opportunities. Italian city-states like Venice saw a massive chance to open up lucrative trade routes. The Crusades were largely military failures in terms of holding territory, but they were a massive cultural and economic success for Europe. They flooded the continent with new goods, silks, spices, and, most critically, ancient Greek and Arab knowledge. This contact with the sophisticated Islamic world was not destruction. It was a spark, setting the stage for an intellectual revolution. They permanently solidified the narrative of Western versus Eastern Christendom and the deep, enduring tensions with the Islamic world. The Crusades didn't just change borders, they changed the European mind. If the High Middle Ages were about forging alliances and consolidating land, they were also about a far more ambitious project, reaching for the heavens themselves. The power of religion in this era is impossible to overstate. It was not just a Sunday affair. It was the framework, the calendar, the very breath of every life. The stone sermon, the Gothic miracle. What is the greatest artistic, engineering, and spiritual achievement of this age? Look up. Look at charts. Look at Notre Dame, the Gothic cathedral. These were not built by central government decrees or royal mandate. They were built by communal faith, by the local ambition of ordinary towns, pooling every penny, every ounce of effort for generations. Imagine the townspeople. Imagine raising a structure that could take a century to complete, a project that its original builders knew with absolute certainty they would never see finished. This is the inspiration we see. This is the most profound feeling of standing for something greater than yourself. The impossible, dizzying height, the pointed arches defying gravity, the vast colored windows transforming sun into liquid jewel light. It all symbolized the aspiration to move beyond the physical world, carving a slice of heaven right here on Earth. This shared effort wasn't just beautiful, it was a massive civic project that taught early Europe how to organize long-term, complex construction and developed crucial engineering principles that underpin our modern architecture. The mind awakes, the birth of reason. The Crusades did not just bring back silks and spices, they brought back knowledge. Suddenly, the forgotten works of Aristotle, the ultimate master of logic, flooded the West. It created an intellectual explosion. Where did this new, dangerous, exciting knowledge go? To the university. Bologna, Paris, Oxford. These were not sterile government schools, they were dynamic, often riotous guilds of scholars and students. The word universitas literally meant a community of masters and scholars. It was here that scholasticism was born, the brilliant, terrifying attempt to reconcile the profound, unshakable faith of the Bible with the cold, hard, skeptical logic of Aristotle. This is the birth of the Western intellectual tradition that values skeptical inquiry and rational debate. It gave us the tools to think for ourselves. It is a defining inheritance. The shadow of the altar, the cost of absolute faith. But where there is absolute authority, there is always resistance and always a shadow. The mystery of faith took a brutal, dark turn. The Church, desperate to maintain unity in a chaotic world, adopted a single, terrifying policy: no tolerance for dissent. Heresy was seen not just as a religious error, it was treated as a political and social poison that could collapse the entire feudal structure. Groups like the Cathars, who challenged the Church's wealth, were deemed a terminal threat and brutally suppressed. The Church's judicial tool was the Inquisition, a court designed to detect, try, and punish heresy. The glory of the cathedrals is a necessary counterfact. The medieval spirit was capable of both profound grace and brutal intolerance. This era shows us the terrible, cautionary power of centralized authority when it becomes absolutely convinced of its own infallibility. The cracks in the foundation. By the year 1300, Europe was, by all accounts, thriving. Trade was booming, cathedrals towered, universities were humming with debate. But the system was strained. The population was too large for the land to support. The power of the Pope was being openly challenged by muscular, ambitious kings like Philip IV of France. The foundation was cracked. The high tide of the High Middle Ages was about to recede. And then, everything came to a terrifying, sudden halt. The stage was set for the late Middle Ages, a century defined not by growth, but by systemic collapse. The age of splendor was over. The age of calamity was about to begin.
The 14th century. Historians call it the Age of Calamity. It wasn't just a bad decade or a difficult war. It was a century of total systemic shock. Europe was hit by a triple hammer blow: famine, plague, and war. The old, intricate feudal order, already strained, simply would not survive it. The Great Mortality, when death tilled the fields. First, the unthinkable. In the year 1347, a ship arrived in Sicily's harbor, carrying more than cargo. It carried the Yersinia pestis bacterium. Within weeks, the invisible enemy was ashore. The speed and scope of the resulting pandemic, what we call the Black Death, is impossible to imagine. Within 3 years, 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's entire population was dead. The horror was immediate and raw, yes, but the long-term consequences were absolutely revolutionary. The entire economic system collapsed. Labor, the foundation of the feudal structure, suddenly became incredibly scarce. The serfs, the poor workers, suddenly held leverage for the first time in 1,000 years. They could demand wages, or they could simply move to a better situation. The Black Death was the single greatest, darkest catalyst for the end of feudalism. The few who survived were, through sheer necessity, forced to innovate, demand dignity, and rebuild the world on new, liberated terms. This tragedy teaches us that immense suffering, through the sheer force of survival, can lead to unexpected liberation. The crucible of nations, the 100 Years' War. While the plague raged, two emerging superpowers, England and France, decided to fight for over a century, from 1337 to 1453. This was not just a battle over who sat on the French throne. This was the historical war that forged these two nations. It became a struggle for national identity. On the battlefield, the age of the noble knight ended with not another knight, but with the English longbow. A disciplined commoner, armed with a simple wooden stave, could unleash arrows that tore through the plate armor of a French heavy cavalryman. It proved that skill could defeat status. The age of chivalry was ending, drowned in mud and blood. The Peasant and the Crown, the inspiring story of Joan of Arc. France was collapsing under the weight of English victories. The kingdom was broken. It was the darkest hour. Then, a miracle of will. A teenage peasant girl emerged, Joan of Arc. She claimed divine guidance, convinced a completely demoralized King Charles VII, and led the French army to victory at Orleans. Her story is the ultimate, defiant proof that the will of the people, regardless of class, age, or gender, can fundamentally change the course of history. She provided the necessary psychological spark that transformed a petty war between kings into a sacred, patriotic struggle for the French nation. She stands for one simple, powerful truth. Unwavering belief in a cause is the greatest military asset. The broken cross, the papal schism. Even the mighty, 1,000-year-old authority of the Church fractured under the stress of the age. For decades, there were two popes, one sitting in Rome, one in Avignon, France. Each claimed absolute authority. Each hurled curses and excommunications at the other. This became known as the papal schism. This political squabbling did more to permanently damage the Church's universal authority than any military defeat. It showed the people that the highest spiritual office was just as prone to corruption, politics, and power grabs as any royal court. This profound loss of universal trust created a chasm between the people and their spiritual leaders. This great fracture would directly and irrevocably pave the way for the coming religious upheaval, the Reformation in the 16th century.
Actually, the 14th century was a brutal correction. Plague shattered the economy, war forged nations, and the schism fractured faith. The old world was dying.
making way for a centralized, technological, and fiercely ambitious new world that defines our final act. The late 15th century is where the Middle Ages end and the early modern period begins. The old world of the knight, the serf, and the universal church was giving way to the soldier, the citizen, and the nation-state. The most potent technologies of the era were gunpowder and the printing press. Gunpowder artillery made the massive, expensive feudal castle obsolete. A king with a few cannons could now subdue any rebellious local lord. This military shift led directly to the centralization of power. Kings became richer and more powerful than ever before, consolidating tax collection and military command. This created the new monarchy, the direct ancestors of today's governments. Our final medieval ruler is Isabella I of Castile. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon united Spain. Together, they completed their Reconquista, expelling the last Islamic kingdom from the Iberian Peninsula. But her most famous act? Funding a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus in 1492. The story? Isabella's patronage wasn't just about discovery, it was about global power and the spread of Catholic faith. She launched Europe onto the global stage. Value? She represents the transition from European infighting to global ambition. So, what did the medieval period give us? It gave us trial by jury, developed in England. It gave us the university system, a model for global education. It gave us the Gothic architectural language. It gave us the very idea of rational debate and scholarly inquiry. But most importantly, it gave us a profound lesson in resilience. The history of medieval Europe is not a story of darkness. It is a story of perseverance. It is a story that tells us civilizations are not fragile glass houses. They are forged in fire, hammered by plague, and rebuilt by the defiant will of ordinary people. When you look at the Europe of today, the modern democracies, the shared culture, the fundamental tensions, you are looking at the direct product of the choices made by those kings, queens, scholars, and peasants. The Saga tells us that when chaos comes, when the institutions you trust collapse, you must stand for something. Stand for knowledge, preserved by the monk. Stand for justice, codified by the law. Stand for the future, as symbolized by the cathedral builder who knows he will never see the spire finished. The past isn't dead. It's the foundation beneath your feet. It's what allows you to reach for the future. And that is a story to be remembered.